There's a type of person who can walk into a room full of strangers and somehow leave knowing exactly who cried themselves to sleep last night, who's hiding rage behind a smile, and who's about to snap. They don't ask, they just know. Science calls this hyper-empathy. Spiritual traditions call it a gift. But here's what nobody warns you about that gift. It has a kill switch. And the day that switch flips, the person who once bent themselves inside out for everyone around them becomes completely, utterly, and peacefully unreachable. Not angry, not broken, just gone from the emotional grid entirely. And the terrifying part? That's not the worst day of their life. That's the day they finally start living it. If this already has you thinking about someone you know or yourself, hit subscribe and drop a like. This one goes deep. Let's start by throwing out the romanticized version of what an empath is, because pop psychology has done a real number on this word. An empath isn't just someone who's nice or sensitive. We're talking about people whose nervous system is literally wired to pick up on emotional frequency the way a radio antenna catches a signal. Researchers in affective neuroscience refer to this as high emotional contagion, where mirror neurons fire so aggressively that another person's distress doesn't just register, it inhabits the body. These are the people who can't watch the news without feeling personally responsible for fixing it, who apologize when someone else bumps into them, who lie awake replaying a conversation from 2 weeks ago, wondering if they accidentally hurt someone's feelings. They are the unofficial therapists of every friend group, every family, every workplace. And here's the wild part. Nobody elected them to that role. It just happened because they were good at it. And once people realized they were good at it, the requests never stopped. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who spent decades mapping the terrain of the unconscious mind, had a term for what these people become within their social systems. He called them the identified carriers, the ones who absorb what everyone else refuses to feel. And he noticed something chilling. The identified carrier rarely complains. They wear the exhaustion quietly. They've been told their whole lives that their sensitivity is a calling, and callings aren't supposed to feel good. They're supposed to cost you something. And so the empath pays, and pays, and pays, until one day the currency runs out. Here's what's fascinating about the way empaths break. It's not dramatic. There's no single volcanic explosion. It's more like a slow geological shift happening miles underground, completely invisible, right up until the moment the surface cracks. Because the empath isn't just absorbing emotions passively. Their mind is cataloging, quietly, meticulously, with the precision of someone who has survived by reading the room their entire life. They know exactly which words their mother uses right before she twists the knife. They've memorized the emotional choreography of every manipulative person in their life, not to use it against them, but because knowing the pattern felt like protection. And that's the detail that stops most people cold when they really sit with it. The empath knew. Long before the betrayal, long before the lie was uncovered, or the cruelty became undeniable, they knew. Their gut had been sending distress signals for months, sometimes years, but they silenced it. They chose hope over evidence. They kept loving the person they believed someone could become, long after the evidence for who that person actually was had piled up in front of them. There's a name for this in psychology. It's called self-betrayal. And according to Jung's clinical observations, this particular wound cuts deeper than any external betrayal could. The moment the empath realizes they overrode their own instincts repeatedly to protect someone who was quietly taking everything, something fundamental changes in them, not with a scream, with a silence. People who've witnessed the shift in someone they know describe it almost identically. They'll say, something changed in their eyes, or they became calm in a way that made me nervous. Because the world is used to the empath's warmth being freely available, unconditional, bottomless, almost compulsive in its generosity. When that warmth becomes selective, when it requires something in return before it's extended, it reads as coldness to people who were never actually offering anything real in the first place. The empath stops answering texts at midnight. They stop mediating arguments they had nothing to do with. They stop shrinking themselves in rooms where their presence has been taken for granted. And crucially, they stop explaining themselves. No long letters, no tearful confrontations, no final attempts to make the other person understand.
They've done that already, more times than anyone knows, in the quiet of their own mind. The conversation is simply over. Jung described this as the withdrawal of projections, the moment the empath stops seeing people as who they hoped they could be and starts seeing them clearly, as they are. It's not disillusionment in the way we usually think about it. It's actually a kind of profound clarity. The fog of wishful thinking lifts, and what's left is vision so sharp that it can feel like a superpower. And the people around them, they panic, because the empath's withdrawal exposes something nobody wanted to look at, that the relationships they were all part of were never actually balanced. The family that seemed close falls into conflict the moment the empath stops absorbing every tension. The friendship that felt like intimacy turns out to have only moved in one direction. The workplace that ran smoothly descends into dysfunction the moment the empath stops doing the invisible emotional labor nobody else was willing to claim. The empath didn't realize how much they'd been holding, and frankly, neither did anyone else. Jung had a concept he called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we've been taught to reject, suppress, or feel ashamed of. For the empath, the shadow is every impulse they ever had to say no, every moment they wanted to prioritize themselves and were told that was selfish, every flash of anger they swallowed, every boundary they tried to draw and then immediately apologized for. The empath's shadow isn't monstrous. It's just a version of themselves that has needs, that knows its own value, that refuses to participate in its own diminishment. Society dressed that part of them up as a villain, called it selfish, called it cold, called it ungrateful. But Jung argued, and modern trauma psychology backs him up on this, that a self without a shadow isn't enlightened, it's fractured. When the empath finally integrates that shadow, something remarkable happens. They don't become cruel, they become whole. The empathy doesn't disappear, it gets a spine. They can still feel everything, but now they choose what to do with what they feel. They become, as Jung put it, a conscious agent of their own emotional life, rather than a leaf being thrown around by everyone else's storm. The beautiful irony here is that the people who called them too sensitive are now the ones who can't handle the version of them that has boundaries. Funny how that works. An awakened empath is one of the most quietly formidable types of people you'll ever meet. They're not impressive in the way that's vowed or obvious, but spend 5 minutes with someone who has been through this process and you'll feel it. There's a groundedness to them that doesn't move when you push on it. They tend to rebuild their lives with unusual intentionality. Career choices shift towards meaning over performance. Relationships are chosen rather than accumulated. Their homes, their schedules, their social circles, everything gets restructured around the question, does this honor who I actually am? Not who I was trained to be, not who people need me to be, who I am. Research on post-traumatic growth, the psychological phenomenon where people emerge from profound suffering with expanded capacity rather than reduced capacity, consistently shows that individuals with high empathic sensitivity are among the most likely to experience this kind of transformative growth after relational betrayal. They don't just recover, they transmute. The very sensitivity that made them vulnerable becomes the thing that makes them extraordinary on the other side. They see manipulation before it can take root. They recognize authentic people immediately. They stop wasting their remarkable emotional intelligence on those who never earned it, and they direct it, finally, towards people who will tend it with care. So here's what I want to leave you with. If you're watching this and you recognize that quiet, that stillness that set in after one too many betrayals, that's not you becoming someone worse. That's you becoming someone real. And if you're watching this thinking of someone in your life who's gone through this shift and you felt like you lost them, sit with that. Because the question worth asking might not be what happened to them, but rather, what was I asking them to carry? Drop a comment and tell me, have you experienced this shift yourself or watched someone go through it? I'd genuinely love to know what it looked like from where you were standing, because every story on this topic teaches me something new, and maybe it'll teach someone else something too.